Good evening, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm glad to see such a full house tonight and to welcome you to this event. In terms of background, is this going to work? This is our symposium on sustainability and the Entrepreneurship Symposium that we're holding here tonight. I'm really delighted to welcome all of you. I'm Sarah Nutter. I'm the Dean of the Lundquist College. And so delighted to welcome you to this event, which I expect to be highly interactive as the evening progresses. So I want to thank our sponsors in particular. They're listed up here on the chart. If we get there, it's going to get there. Give me a minute. Maybe. Speak to me. It's not speaking to me. There it is. Okay. And our sponsors, the Schnitzer family, especially the Lundquist College itself, and then Oregon Halal. In addition to that, we have many other sponsors, and I want to thank them as well. And they're up here on the screen. Tonight, we're already behind schedule, but that's kind of the way we're moving tonight. I'm glad to see so much activity and engagement and conversation already beginning. But this is the general plan. We'll have an opportunity to have an introduction in just a moment of our main speaker, a time for conversation afterwards, and then a time of conversation with the speaker himself. And also then I am asked to remind you that after the event there's also a time for networking. The book that his talk is based upon is available at a discount price, you told me. Heavily discounted price of $10 a copy, and he'll be available to sign also, I understand, after the event as well. This event is being live streamed by CMAT, and I really want to thank them for being with us tonight to be able to do that. And I should say what that is. It's a Center for Media and Educational Technologies. And so I really want to thank them for being here tonight. And with that said, then I'd like to make one point to sort of start the conversation. When you think about water scarcity, what do you think about? And more importantly, where do you think about it? So I was a little surprised about a week ago to see this. Take a look at these cities. These are the cities, 11 cities most likely to run out of water. Now you'll notice there's really 12 there because they started with Cape Town as ground zero. These are cities that cover the globe. And so as you think about, this isn't just a localized problem, this is a global problem that we're really addressing. And so I'm really fascinated to hear our conversation as it moves on tonight. And with that said, I really have the distinct honor to introduce a woman that will be introducing our speaker himself. Her name is Ravit Baer. She is the Deputy Consul General to the Pacific Northwest since 2015. She's held previous positions at the Department for Multilateral European Organization at the European Division, and she's a career diplomat since 2004 with the Foreign Service in Israel. And with that said, I'd really like to bring you up and thank you for your service, but also to introduce our speaker. There we go.
This one works? Hi. I never normally use a microphone, but I'm really happy that I need to because this is really a full house. And thank you everyone for coming here to listen and learn a little about water scarcity in Israel. Being an Israeli, you grow up from a very young age knowing that there is no water and you have to save water and shower fast and, you know, close the tap and don't brush your teeth for so long and all these kind of things. And then when about 6 or 7 years ago, I want to say, the government announced that we pretty much solved our water problem. That was pretty amazing for someone who grew up in Israel. So I'm not going to tell you how that happened because we have someone who is a specialist on that will tell us exactly how that came to happen. But I want to remind you all that we're technically in a desert. Israel is in a region that is technically a desert. I don't know if you saw in the list that was shown before, but one of the cities there is Cairo, not far from us, North Africa, but very bordering Israel. And our entire region suffers from severe scarcity of water. One of the main reasons that is not talked about, but for the horrible civil war in Syria, is water scarcity and the lack of water that brought people into the cities. So with that, thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll have a very interesting talk. I would like to present the speaker tonight. Seth Siegel. He's a great man. He's a serial entrepreneur, water activist, and a New York Times best-selling author. Recognized for his thought, leadership, and advocacy on water scarcity and quality. He's the author of the award-winning international bestseller, Let There Be Water, Israel's Solution for Water-Starved World. Available in more than 50 countries and 15 foreign languages. Also in Hebrew, by the way, and I have it on my table. The book has won praise from Tony Blair, Michael Bloomberg, and Nobel laureate Shimon Peres, among other global figures. Seth is the Daniel M. Soref Senior Fellow at the University of Wisconsin Center for Water Policy, and his commentary has appeared in many leading publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as on television and radio. Seth has spoken about water issues before hundreds of audiences around the world, including in Congress, the United Nations, and Google's headquarters, as well as dozens of universities, including Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. Based in New York, Seth is currently at work on a book about the widespread contamination of America's drinking water. Thank you, Seth, and please.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Okay, did you come here for me or for the food? Tell me the truth. What did you know? Did you know the food was going to be here? I want to thank everybody for coming out. I know students have busy lives. I know some faculty members here could be doing things other than listening to me tonight. So I thank you all for doing that. I hope you find it worthwhile. Before I start my more formal remarks, though, I'd like to acknowledge the simple fact of life, which is that nothing happens by itself. Buildings don't get built by itself, except in Harry Potter. And great events like this don't come together unless somebody makes it happen. I'd like to there was a lot of people who helped out with this, but I'd like to thank in particular the Schnitzer family. I'd like to thank very much so Andy Gittleson from Hillel. Andy, where are you? I don't see you. Wherever you are, there you are. And I need to really say, I have since the book came out in September of 2015, I'll talk about that experience in a few minutes. I have very unexpectedly struck a nerve with the book, and have been invited to speak, as you heard in the introduction, thank you, Ravit, but in many, many places. And I've had really a great and fun time traveling all over the world. I've spoken in 27 US states now, almost 70 cities, and I've been in 4 continents. It's really been a great journey collecting frequent flyer miles. It's really been a wonderful thing. But I have to say, I don't believe I have ever experienced anyone as a host as extraordinary as Natalie Ben. Natalie, would you just stand up and say hello to everybody? I mean, some people, hit for power and can also steal bases, but can't do other things. You did it all. You pulled the crowd together, you thought up the theme, you invited me, you got me to come to Eugene, Oregon, and I kind of have a rule. No destinations that require 2 flights. But for you, I would do it 3 more times, 4 more times. But do me a favor, when you graduate, move to a 1-flight zone if you could, okay? So I just want to put that down so I can sort of keep track of where I am in terms of time. Do you still want me to speak for the same amount of time, or you want me to end where we originally scheduled? Tell me what you prefer. Do my thing. Okay. So I really thank you, Natalie. Extraordinary. And I thank also for those of you involved in community activities here on campus. If it's TAMID, if it's Hillel, if it's AEPI, or if it's some other organization that I haven't mentioned, I really want to thank you for doing that. And tell you that when I was an undergraduate, I learned a lot in the classroom, but I actually think I learned even more from the extracurricular things that I did. And sometimes pulling an all-nighter, I said, why the hell did I, why did I spend that day at the campus newspaper? Why did I spend that day at the ski club? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? But in reality, I can't remember which exam I was studying for anymore, but the skills that I picked up with those extracurricular activities have remained with me to this very day. So it's been a great experience. So let me talk a little bit about how I came to write this book. For those of you who didn't pick this up from Ravit's introduction, I am somewhat new to the world of water. It happened almost completely by accident, and it was a happy accident, and it had a sort of a spiraling way, one good consequence after another for me, and it helped me to also share with large numbers of people something that I think is of grave concern that there is not yet enough awareness of. So how did it all happen? I'm a lawyer and a businessman, and I've been involved in a lot of different things, and have had a wonderful business career. And I'm a member of a foreign policy think tank, and about almost 6 years ago now, I randomly attended a lecture. It's sort of like, you have a friend who's taking a class, and there's a great professor, so you decide you'll just poke your head in one session because you're free that hour, and maybe you don't do that, so maybe you. Okay, but anyway, but whoever. So that's sort of what I do. I go to this foreign policy think tank, they have speakers all the time, and I randomly go in, and one day I come in, and there's a speaker there who is a US government senior intelligence official. And what this fellow talks about is the fact that he is in possession of a just declassified report that said that by the year 2025, 60% of the world's landmass will be experiencing water scarcity. By the year 2040, the world will be experiencing severe dislocation. Sometime in that interval between 2025 and 2040, that we'll start seeing higher food prices, we'll start seeing instability in many countries. He said by prediction that the guess is that some states that are fragile will begin to fail, and that it could lead to global instability, and further, could even require a rethinking of America's global defense architecture. That's a pretty heavy load of things to hear. Meanwhile, I live in New York City. Water scarcity is something I never thought of. In February of 2012, I had never thought of scarcity in America. I thought of it as something that, if you have a long night and you turn on the TV, you see some very sad and tragic story about people in African villages or Asian villages carrying water on their head from a water source back to their village, doing it multiple times a day. And it's a sad and painful thing to watch, but it's them, it's not us. So I started thinking about this, and I don't know exactly why. Frequently, by the way, you get very excited, at least I get very excited about something, and then 2 days later, there's something else that's, maybe it's an adult attention deficit disorder of some kind, very excited about something and very excited about the next thing that comes along. But in any event, I leave this talk, and I find myself wondering, how come I don't know more about this? And thanks to the internet, you can be an expert on just about anything. So I go back to my office, and I just start reading and reading and reading. And the problem is severe. I'll take just a moment to explain some of the causes of this, because the dean, in her very kind setting out the framework of this, set out the fact that basically it's the entire world. Those are global cities, important cities, but what's omitted from that, I'm very familiar with that report, by the way, what's omitted from that report is that those aren't the only cities. There are dozens and dozens more that have already at risk, and even in South Africa, where everyone's talking about Cape Town, there are several cities with populations of 1 million or more that already run out of water. And there are other places around the world about to run out of water. So this is not a make-believe, perhaps, issue. This is everything that intelligence official predicted on that afternoon in February 2012 is slowly unfolding. And so let me share with you a couple of the elements that lead to this. First of all, most obviously, climate change. Rainfall patterns are changing everywhere. First of all, there's a lot less of it in many places, but even where there's the same exact amount of rain, what's happening is the interval from rainfall A to B to C is elongating. So the surface temperatures are slightly higher, soil is getting baked a little bit harder, the next rainfall comes, and it falls very, very hard. The soil now is hard pack. That's the word for it. It's hard pack. And instead of doing what is supposed to happen when the rain falls, which is it falls gently, slowly, regularly, and the soil absorbs the rain, and the soil, it's called groundwater, stores that water until you need it. And it gets pumped out. or it finds its way through underground channels to a river or to a lake, and it gets pumped out. But what's happening now is it hits hard, and it's like hitting asphalt, and it runs off. So whether you're having less organically or less rainfall, or you're having the same rainfall but it's falling in a different pattern, the net effect is there's less rain. Now maybe, does it ever rain here in Eugene? I don't know. I'm new here. I don't know. If it does, if it ever rains here again, you may want to pay attention to, because you may not have the interval problem of, because it may be every single day of the rest of your life here it may rain, but in any event, you may discover that there's a change even here in how the rain falls, intensity and so forth, duration and so forth. The second major cause of this thing is population. We are right now about 7 billion people in the world, and something we don't think about much, but we are projected to rise by mid-century to between 10 and 11 billion people. Now, this is going to come up a few times during this evening, and that is the largest user of fresh water is not your shower in the morning. Even if you use shampoo and conditioner and gel and 3 more treatments, that's not the problem. It's good to take shorter showers and so forth, but that's not the problem. Agriculture is the issue. Growing food is extremely water intensive. Now, a year or so ago, when the California drought was happening, there was a whole bunch of things maybe some of you heard about, let's not eat almonds because it takes a gallon of water to grow an almond. I don't know if it's exactly true that it takes a gallon of water. Did anybody here hear that? Anybody remember hearing that? A lot of you. And maybe even some of you thought you were virtuous citizens saying, I'm giving up eating almonds. But the reality is all food takes enormous quantities of water to grow. A glass of wine, a single glass of wine takes over 30 gallons of water to prepare the grapes and to go through the process of getting that wine. A hamburger can be over 600 gallons of water. So we have to eat something. No matter what it is that we're eating is taking lots of water to get to us. And so therefore, if we are 7 billion people in the world today, rising to even 8 or 9 billion, forget about 10 or 11 billion, and we're already somewhat pinched in our water resources, getting ourselves to the point of the 10 or 11 billion is going to be all the harder. And there are many other causes, but I will just take one other example, and that is rising affluence. The UN estimates that between now and about 10 years from today, 1.3 billion people will rise out of dire poverty into something resembling the middle class. Now, resembling the middle class doesn't necessarily mean living the lifestyles that we live, although it might. But what it means is that right now they live without electricity, and right now they live without any animal protein in their diet. Now, we don't think about this, but these light bulbs that are flashing and that are shining on me right now are high-intensity light bulbs. In the course of this lecture, these 2 bulbs, I don't know the exact wattage they are, so I can't say exactly the number, but a 60-watt light bulb burning for 1 hour uses 3/4 of a gallon of water. So multiply that by all the light bulbs you have in your house, and your computer, and your refrigerator, and your air conditioners, and all the other stuff you have burning in your house. And multiply that by a whole city. You ever fly in late at night to Eugene? I did last night. And it was actually kind of thrilling. You know why? Because about 10 minutes out, what did I see out of the window? I saw lights everywhere. Lights everywhere. We live in an industrial society. We use lots of energy. And using energy requires lots of water. So if 1.3 billion people who right now have no electricity in their lives suddenly start living in homes with light bulbs and maybe computers and maybe refrigerators, we're going to need lots more water. Plus, as I said, growing food takes lots of water. And animal protein is the most water-intensive of all. So I leave this meeting, and I start thinking to myself, this is a big problem. I want to know more about it. So I go back to my office, as I said, and I start reading about it. And every single place I turned in reading about this, I find that a solution to the problem was either invented in Israel or had as a major component of its discovery and solution an Israeli element. And I found myself bewildered by that because I had been to Israel and I knew the country. Can I just see a show of hands? How many of you have ever been to Israel? Show of hands. Okay, many of you. Okay, so can I just, I don't want to make anybody feel, could somebody here who had a hand up who's an exhibitionist want to help me for a second? Anybody here? Anybody? Come on, you. No, it should be you because you told them to do it. Have you ever been to Israel? Okay, what's your name? Josh, okay. Only first names. I don't want to embarrass you with your friends here. Okay, just Josh. Josh, so when you think of Israel, what sort of do one of those sort of SAT type things? Israel is to water kind of thing. Like, what do you think about in terms of Israel? Wet place, dry place, Ireland, London?
It used to be like a desert, now it's like somewhat more.
Desert.
It has more forests and stuff.
Yeah, so Josh says that it's like desert. So 2/3 of the country is desert. The rest of the country is semi-arid. It only rains when it rains in Israel from October or November to, if it's a great year, to April, but most years it starts in November and it ends in March. And even then, right now, Israel's getting, on average, much less rainfall. Now, I said before there were 3 elements. The guy talked about more than that, but 3 key elements: climate change, population growth, and economic activity, right? Well, Israel in the last 25 years has lost about 1/3 of its average annual rainfall. Second, population growth. You may not know this, but I'll share it with you. From independence in May of 1948 to today, Israel has had the fastest rate of population rise of any country in the world. It's grown 11-fold since independence in May of 1948. That is an enormous number of people. That's even faster than the projected rate of rise of global population right now. And the third element, economic activity, other than Singapore and South Korea, also since about 1950, Israel has had the most dynamic growth curve of any other economy in the world. So I'm thinking, what is going on here? How is this possible? And then I dig a little bit deeper, and I find some other amazing things. So first of all, yes, the country is mostly desert, as Josh pointed out. If you've been to Israel, anywhere you go in the country, you can turn on the faucet and always know you're going to get fresh, clean, safe, healthy water. Pretty remarkable. Now, we in America take that mostly for granted, and I think 10 years from now we won't, but right now we do. And it's true of Western Europe, and it's true of Japan, but there are very few countries in the world right now that can say across the entire expanse of their country that you can turn on the faucet and get water whenever you want it. And on top of that, Israel, for national security reasons mostly, is self-sufficient in fruits and vegetables and has such a robust agricultural sector that what? That they also have a multi-billion-dollar agricultural export industry. And what is agriculture really, if you think about it for a second? What is agriculture? It's value-added water, right? So what are they doing when you sell a tomato that goes to Holland or you're selling a flower that goes to London? What does that mean? It means you're exporting water, in essence. And only a country that's really secure about its water future, or very foolish, would do something like that. And in addition to this, and tonight I don't really, unless people want during the question and answer, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm not here to talk about necessarily political elements, but Israel not only has enough water for itself, but under treaties and otherwise, Israel provides the Palestinians in the West Bank with about 60% of the water used in Palestinian homes in the West Bank. They provide a significant amount of water to the Palestinians in Gaza, even during periods of conflict when rockets are flying out of Gaza. Israel continues to flow water into Gaza. And on top of that, Israel provides the Kingdom of Jordan next door with about 10% of the water it uses every day. So I set out on a journey to find out how this all happened. Now, I'll pause for a second and reflect a little bit on me and tell you, some of you may be interested in the story of how this happened, that a businessman late in life happens to write this book. So I read all this, and I learn all this, and I think to myself, this is a fantastic story. But most importantly of all, I realize that nobody is thinking loudly or talking a lot about coming water scarcity. Nobody is focusing, as Dean Nutter has pointed out to us, that some of the world's most important cities are at risk of running out of water. And by the way, added to your list, that was a February 11th report. This morning, a report was issued out of Australia, which is the only continent that was not listed on that list, right? That Australia, within 10 years, is at risk of having severe water scarcity in their 4 largest cities. So this is something that's not a small phenomenon, it's a growing phenomenon. So I decide I'm going to start writing some articles. The articles lead to writing a book. And my wife and I joke about it that we'll never find a real publisher. We'll find some publisher, maybe, who works out of his basement in Indiana or something like that. But I write the book. I would have to say that I hit sort of a lucky moment, a Cinderella moment. I send the book out. It gets picked up by one of the largest publishers in the world. Book comes out. It takes a few months for them to prepare the book for publication. The book comes out, and you could have knocked me over with a feather. The third week out, it becomes a New York Times bestseller. Fifth week out, it's a Los Angeles Times bestseller. Eighth week out, it becomes a Washington Post bestseller. And that leads to being invited to speak all over the place. That leads to now, as you said in the introduction, some 17 international editions, and it's being available in over 50 countries around the world, which is a fantastic thing. I'm delighted by it. And also, I should add, every single penny of the royalties and from the books, every penny goes directly to charity. It never comes to me at all. So I'm happy that it helps that too. But I want to say that it's important to understand how this all happened. So let me take a couple of minutes and explain what Israel did, but let me also talk about why this is important. We have been using the word sustainability. We have been using the phrase innovation for as long as I can remember. And if ever there was a moment when we need to start thinking about sustainable use of resources, now is the moment. You know, a few years ago, we thought we were going into something called peak oil. We were going to run out of energy. But you know what? It proved to be false. I don't want to say we have peak water because I'll talk about some technologies that prove that we don't have peak water, but we are sleepwalking as a country and as a world into a severe crisis. We do not, on the current usage patterns of water, I'm not saying that we're using too much, I'm saying we're using it the wrong way, we're developing it the wrong way, we're distributing it the wrong way, we're caring for it the wrong way. We are going to face a crisis. And we talk about innovation a lot, but we don't, in the main, think about innovation in water because we think of water as something like sunshine or air. We think of water as something like a granted right. And therefore, we don't really think a lot about how we're going to get more sunshine. Even in Eugene, Oregon, we don't think about how we're going to get more sunshine. We think about this as something that's just going to be there. Okay, so let me take a few minutes and talk about what Israel did. First of all, from its very first, and Ravit said this a bit in her introduction, Israel has a culture that has a reverence for water. Children are educated in school to be careful about water. Second of all, part of the culture of the country has been to prioritize water. It's something that leaders have to think about and worry about, and they were doing that before there even was a state of Israel in May of 1948. And you know what? When you prioritize something, when you focus on something, you don't always get a great outcome, but sometimes you do. And I make the argument that Israel has had three great existential choices that they made. The first of which, everybody knows, Israel made a decision that they couldn't survive unless they had a great military capability. And today, Israel, a tiny country, the size of New Jersey, population of under 9 million total population, has what's believed to be the fourth or fifth greatest military in the world, not per capita, in absolute terms. Because in the 1930s, they make the decision that one way or another, they're going to defend themselves by themselves, and they're going to build out a great military capability, and they succeed. The second great choice they make, and something that I would argue America has a lot to learn from Israel, the second important choice they make is that they want Israel to be a home for every and any Jewish person who wants to settle in the land of Israel. And so they build out what is the world's greatest immigration absorption system. Now, I mentioned earlier that Israel grew 11-fold from independence through today, right? But from independence till sometime late in 1951, about 3 years, Israel does something almost incomprehensible. It doubles in size. It doubles in size. Just imagine what that means in terms of new buildings that have to be built, new schools, new clinics, new roads. It completely overwhelms the society. And yet, instead of doing something that you might call orderly immigration, where, okay, this year we'll have 50,000, this year we'll have 20,000, this year we'll have people from this country, people from that country, they say, anybody who wants to come on in, we'll figure it out. Extraordinary choice. Choice number two, immigration is going to be prioritized. We will figure it out. People will land. People will get here, and we will integrate them. People come from 120 different countries. They speak different languages. They have different clothing. They have different ways of being Jews. We will figure it out. The third great existential choice they make is that we will never permit water shortage to forestall our national growth. This is not a recent thing that happened in the last couple of years. This starts in the 1930s with a key decision-making process that I talk about in my book, which grows out of a tragic interlude, maybe we'll talk about during the Q&A, a tragic, horrible precursor of World War II and the Holocaust. But Israel makes a bunch of decisions that leads to the most extraordinary water system in the world, so that by the time that the state is formed in 1948, they are ready to build out a great water system. Okay. Third great thing Israel does, price. In America, we do not pay for our water. We may get water bills, but we do not pay for our water. Whatever the price we are charged is a fanciful price. The city council or the mayor or the water utility decides on a price, and that's what is billed to us. But we don't pay the real price because the infrastructure is subsidized, the administration is subsidized, lots of people don't pay at all, the city doesn't pay for the water they use for the parks, and so on and so on and so forth. By having to pay for the real price of water, what it does is it spurs innovation. It spurs, first of all, conservation, because when you have to pay for something, you make a choice. So for Josh, right? Did you actually buy that ratty sweatshirt you're wearing? Yes. You did, okay. But if somebody wanted you to pay like $500 for it, would you have bought it? Of course not, right? But it was for 15 cents, you might have gotten 6 of them, right? Yeah, of course, that's all of us, right? So price is a factor. Anybody here studying economics here by any chance? Right, so I'm speaking your language, right? Market signals. By charging the real price, Josh, I owe you a free book, by the way. You come up afterwards, and anybody else who helps us with this presentation, it's on me, okay? Make sure you see me afterwards. I'm buying you a copy, okay? And maybe you'll buy me one of your 15-cent sweatshirts also, okay? Okay, it's a deal? Okay. But when you send price signals to the marketplace, what happens? What happens is that you get smart consumer behavior. You use as much water as you need, but you don't waste water, right? Anybody who pays for electricity in their home, and you really do pay for your electricity, going away for like the day, would anybody here like ever just walk out of the house and leave all the lights on in the house? Anybody do that? Your husband. Your husband. And does your husband also leave the cap off the toothpaste? Do I know him? I don't even know who, I mean, I just met you tonight, but do I know your husband? Yes, of course. Okay, your husband does, exactly. Did anybody here ever stay in a hotel room and walk down the hallway and realize you're at the elevator and all of a sudden say, oops, I left the lights on in the room? And what do you do at that point? What do you do at that point? Do you go back and turn it off? No. Exactly. And that's the value of price. That's the economics 101 class in 5 minutes, okay? I just gave it to you. When it's free or subsidized, you're reckless with it. And when you pay the real price for it, you're smart with it. But there's a second, equally important factor. And this goes back to innovation. Because in Israel, they pay the full real price for water, it spurs innovation. Because what technology is about is, nobody's going to spend money for technology if they're getting the primary product for free. But if you have to pay for your water, then what? Then if you can find a way with technology to save on your water cost, of course you're going to do that. And this sets off a virtuous circle, because Israel now is the global center of water innovation. They created it for their own domestic market, and now they have a multi-billion-dollar water technology export market of their technologies. Let me just take a couple more minutes and I'll stop, and then we'll turn it over to a conversation with the Dean and I. Let me just share with you a couple of technologies. First, I said before that agriculture is the largest user of water. I may shock some of you. Everywhere in the world, about 70% of the fresh water is used for agriculture. In California, it's 85%. In Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, countries that are even less efficient, it's 90 to 95% of their fresh water goes to agriculture. Understanding that, going back many years, the Israelis have looked for one great innovation in agriculture after another, and because of time, I'll only focus on just one of them. But there are many. Drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is invented in Israel. It is a fantastic technology. I love it. It's my favorite of all their technologies. And why? Because not only does it save enormous amounts of water, because let me explain what it is for those of you who don't know it. Most fields, anybody here from a farm? Anybody here grew up on a farm? I know you did. Anybody else? Okay. Well, is this a problem about America that we have like less than 2% of an audience on a farm? Anybody here serve in the military? Would you see that? Show of hands. Yeah, okay, exactly. Okay. Okay, so let me share with you how most farms work. Sometimes farms get enough rain that they don't need any irrigation at all. That's not usually the case. But most farms, when they irrigate, what they do is they create trenches in their field and they flood the field, right? Remember like 4th grade or 5th grade social studies, like what they did in Egypt or the Tigris-Euphrates rivers around the Nile or the Tigris-Euphrates? They would flood the fields with the rivers, and then they would grow their crops with that. Well, that's what we still do around the world. We flood our fields, a little bit more sophisticated now, but we waste about 60% of the water to evaporation. Or if you're in an airplane, sometimes you see those big circles in the field. You ever fly over and you see those big circles in the field? That's called center pivot irrigation. That loses between 25 and 45% of the water to evaporation. Drip irrigation it's an idea to put a hose right next to the roots of a plant, usually underground, and tiny drippers, subterranean drippers, drip droplets of water at regular intervals to make sure the plant gets all the water that it needs, but evaporation is 0. So instead of losing 50, 60% of your water, you lose nothing, and as a corollary to that, you also grow much more yield. So you grow more with less, and it's a fantastic innovation. In Israel, there is no flood irrigation. People only use drip irrigation, and this is a big transformation. The whole world could be doing this, and I'm going to predict in an ever drier world, this will be the solution. The country of India now has a crash program. It's the largest adopter now. The country of India has a crash program to install drip irrigation in every field in the country to save on water because they are about to run out of water everywhere. I'll get to that in my closing remarks. 2 other quick technologies I want to talk about. Israel, back over 50 years ago, made a decision to do something that we in America think of as disgusting, but now I predict everyone in America will be thinking about and almost everyone will be doing within the next 5 to 10 years. Israel makes the decision that sewage, the stuff that goes down our sinks, our washing machines, our dishwashers, our showers, our bathtubs, and even our toilets, Israel makes the decision that that water is too precious to waste. What do we do in America? What we do in America is we gather all that sewage in more advanced communities, we treat it to a good level, and then we dump it in the nearest river, lake, or ocean. In the less developed parts of the world, they do nothing with it. They flush the toilet, they dump the toilet, and the stuff just goes into the flow with bad environmental consequences. But in America, in a sophisticated city like mine in New York or here in Eugene, I will tell you what you do. What you do is you treat that stuff, you clean it up, and then you dump it into a waterway. And that is crazy. If you are in a water-constrained place, that is doubly crazy. And so Israel makes a decision that they're going to save their sewage to make it good and clean. In fact, to make it so clean that you could actually drink it if you had to drink it. But they make a decision that psychologically people are not going to want to drink sewage no matter how clean it is. And so they build out, it takes them decades to do it, billions of dollars. They decide to build out a parallel national water infrastructure system to irrigate their crops with this ultra-purified treated sewage. And because agriculture, remember we said that agriculture is at least 70% of your water, because of the fact that most of the water now that used for crops is water that was going to be discarded anyway, it's an incredible savings. And let me tell you another benefit. It's not used just one time. It's not used just one time at all. The water is shipped down to the Negev desert. A tomato is grown there. That tomato is shipped back to, say, Tel Aviv. Somebody has a salad. 45 minutes later, if you're a little bit older, maybe 25 minutes later, you deposit your tomato proceeds into your bank account in your toilet. The water gets cleaned. It gets sent down to the Negev again. Another tomato or maybe a cucumber is grown. A year and a half later, you're having salad at your table, and you say, haven't I seen you somewhere before? But in fact, you can have this over and over and over again. And so this is an extraordinary transformation of not using a drop once, but using a drop over and over again. And the third technology I'll talk about, but there are many, but I'll stop here, is desalination. It's not for everybody. You have to be up within 50 or 100 miles of a coastline, so it's not for everybody by any means. But over half of the world's population now lives within 50 miles of a seashore. And what desalination does is it takes salty water out of the sea, no matter how dirty it is, no matter how salty it is, and pushed it through an incredible filtration system, again, developed in Israel. And on one side comes out slushy, briny, salty, intensely salty stuff that gets transferred back out to the ocean. And the other part of the water is the purest water you can ever have. It is so pure. It is so pure that they have to crush limestone and mix it into the water because it would hurt you to drink it. It would be so pure. It's purer than rainwater. That's how pure it is. So I want to close my remarks by talking about our failure to make good on this, but also talking about what could be good news. And that is, has anybody ever here heard the expression that the wars of the 21st century will be fought over water? Has anybody here ever heard that expression? A lot of you have. I personally don't buy it, and there's a lot of reasons why. I'll tell you in summary, one reason is that wars are very expensive. They build nothing, and it's cheaper if you're just not completely brain dead to build out a good water system and not go to war and kill people. So that's the best reason why I don't believe that. But what we can say is that that water has not necessarily been a source of good neighbors. There's been lots of fights between India and Pakistan and between China and their neighbors, and in South America, recently some conflict over water rights, and all over the world there's water conflicts going on. But the other thing that Israel has shown is that water can be used as a source of cooperation, of coexistence, of neighbor building, of relationship building, and sometimes even peace. Israel has taken its water technologies, exported them to more than 150 countries around the world, including countries that are formally at war with Israel. I know this for a fact, that Israeli businessmen and businesswomen carrying Israeli passports with prior special arrangements fly to countries that at the United Nations say the most horrible things about Israel, but they come there and they sell and they service these countries Israeli water technologies. And 110 countries, not countries that condemn Israel necessarily, but 110 countries have benefited from Israeli water technology training, either coming to Israel or Israeli technicians coming to their countries in sort of an Israeli Peace Corps to educate them about water projects. Water can be a great door opener, and even amongst the Palestinians, and I don't mean to suggest for a moment that there aren't fraught relations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. There are. And if we want to talk about that during the Q&A, I'm happy to do that as well. But what I can say is that even in the worst days of conflict, what is good news, and I spoke in doing my research for this book, I interviewed 220 people, 180 Israelis, 20 US government officials and other heads of NGOs, and 20 leading Palestinian water people. And what I learned delighted me, frankly. What I learned is that even in the worst days of the worst conflicts between the parties, the flow of water and water cooperation continues to keep a line of communication between the parties. And so, and I say in my book, and I don't have time now because time doesn't permit to do this, but Israel has shown a way of defanging the hostility of several countries that had nothing to do with them. I tell the story of how, not the current Iran, but the prior Iran, came to have peaceful relations with Israel because of water. How the country of China, which had refused to have any dealings with Israel whatsoever out of respect for the Arab boycott of Israel, how China comes to support an engagement with Israel and creates diplomatic relations with Israel to get access to Israeli water technologies, and that this too is a door opener for Israel and its Arab neighbors, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and others, and indeed even with the Palestinians. I want to close with a scary image, but also a hopeful image. I said before, and the dean in her comments talked about cities that are going to run out of water. Well, it's not an intellectual exercise. We're talking about a real-world phenomenon. And if places run out of water, people are not going to simply say, oh, well, then I'll just simply get bottled water. People are going to pick up and move. In the last handful of years, we have seen the destabilization of the world over the immigration issue. The Syrian civil war generated many refugees. And when the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, announced 2.5 years ago that Europe will absorb a mere 2 million refugees out of 430 million people in Europe across a continental landmass, it set off all kinds of demonstrations. It led to the rise of right-wing populist parties in Hungary, in Poland. It led, I believe, to Brexit. It led to almost a right-wing government coming to power in France. It led to populist governments rising and populist parties rising throughout Europe. I will even make an argument that there was an echo effect across the Atlantic and that it contributed to instability here in America and led to some of the interest and appeal in somebody who ended up becoming president, largely on an anti-immigrant policy. 2 million immigrants. There are 80 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who live in places that are at risk of running out of water. There are 600 million Indians living in places that are at risk of running out of water. South America has somewhere between 50 and 60 million people at risk of running out of water. And therefore, if we don't get our act together, and this is really a cry for your work, you are students, you are activists, we can make a difference. Let's raise awareness, let's educate ourselves about these issues. This is a very real concern, but this is the good news. The good news is that we don't have to end in tragedy and catastrophe. There are techniques that were invented in Israel that we see were tried and true, proven to work in Israel, and these are things that everyone in the world can be adopting. It's in our hands. It could be a great outcome, it could be a terrible outcome. And with that hopeful but scary outcome and news, I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to ask the dean, I think, to come on up, and we'll have a conversation. Thank you all very much.
Well, at this point, hope and fear. I find it a little bit overwhelming. In fact, as I came up here, I had a set of questions written up, and I threw them all out.
Wow.
To some degree, because I think one of the questions I really have to start this is, I feel like we are sort of coming in mid-flight. And what I mean by that is, as we look around the world, we have systems that are already in place. We have a patchwork of municipalities and states and various sort of political entities that play a role in water management and how we distribute water, not just here in this country, but globally. So I guess my first question for you is, when we're coming in mid-flight, when we're not starting with a sort of a greenfields opportunity, like in some respects they had in Israel, what would you say are some of the practical new steps or practical steps that we could take? Or as we're thinking about solutions as students here and as faculty that would make meaningful differences in the context that we live in?
Sure. Thanks a lot. It's a great question, very thoughtful question. So first of all, the fact of the matter is that Israel had sort of a blank slate to work on, makes it easier in terms of if you're going to be building out a system in a municipality, because you don't have to dig or move businesses or move houses or things like that. That does make it a little bit easier. But it's not beyond the talent of engineering to be thinking about how to move pipes underground. So that's an issue of expense, but it's an issue of expense and to some degree of timing, but it's not an issue of ability to do. So that's the first thing to say. Second thing to say is that because of the nature of sort of an introductory remark, maybe a 101 class to put in academic terms, it required me to sort of do a quick survey of everything. But I think that what I said as the single most important thing we need to do is to get our hands on smart agriculture is still what I believe. I think we need to do that. I think not everywhere, but in many places, the adoption of other technologies that make sense will be very important. And this may sound counterintuitive. I think arguing for full, fair pricing of water, nobody wants to pay more. Josh doesn't want to pay more for his sweatshirt, but nobody wants to pay more. Josh, if I keep going, you get 2 free books, okay? Nobody wants to pay more, but sometimes cheap is a bad idea. And so that's something I would say. And then I would also make the argument that making this an issue that's on our agenda. What we are very bad at in society, and I would give a lot of praise to Israelis in this regard, we are very bad in America at thinking about tomorrow's problems. You know, and I think about this in lots of terms. You know, our leaders perpetually address the crisis moment. And I have a very good friend, I talked with you about him at dinner. I have a very good friend who's a US Senator. And I raised with him the fact that why aren't you senators doing more about water scarcity? And he agrees with me. I've laid, in much more detail than I did tonight, I've laid out with him what we're talking about here. And he said to me something that kind of shocked me. He said, you need to understand that we senators would rather spend 3 times as much money when there's a crisis than to spend 1/3 as much money now. Because how do we explain to taxpayers that they need to worry about it now? And I think that there's something broken about the leadership model, and I was mentioning that I think that Israel gets this very right, is that Israel looks over the horizon and says, where are we? What are our needs? You know, Cape Town is in the news a lot lately. But, I mean, Cape Town, anybody look at the map of Cape Town? Does the name sort of suggest that they might maybe be near an ocean?
Slightly.
You know, I mean, it isn't that hard to imagine that it would be a smart idea for them to be creating desalinated water. And now they're doing it at great expense. They're rushing it out. They're not going to have it in time. They're going to inconvenience themselves and their people very much. And I think that that's very foolish. And then the final thing I'd say is that, you know, one of the great things about being a student, at least I think, is that you get to pick who your identity is anew every few months. You know, you change your major, maybe you change your boyfriend or your girlfriend, maybe you change what your career is going to be, maybe you change where you're going to live when you graduate. I mean, you kind of change your identity. When you're an old fogey like me or you, it's not usual that you change
Hey.
Oh, did I? Not you. You.
Oh, good, thanks.
I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about him. Made you all look, didn't I? But you know, you became dean a year ago. You
Yep.
picked up from the East Coast to move here. I changed careers, became sort of an overnight water expert. But most people sort of stay where they are. But students sort of pick their identity, and you're going to pick a cause or 2 or 3 that you care about. And I would hope that you'll maybe take tonight as an exciting moment to think about the fact that for sustainability reasons, there's nothing more important than water. And also, you know, for those of you who have interest in public policy or engineering or a business career, this is going to be a great, great career opportunity. Water is going to be a very high agenda item for all of us in the coming years, and that's not going away anytime soon.
Well, and it's sort of a follow-up question to that then. If you think about sort of the role of policy, regulation, business, government, this sort of patchwork of areas that have an impact on how we think about water and how we manage water. And you think about how we begin to just make micro changes, micro solutions that begin to move us in the right direction. What are some of those things that we could sort of practically take on?
So I'm working on another book right now. It's about, Ravit mentioned in the introduction of it, it's about America's drinking water quality. And it is, I tell you, it is far, I mean, I'm drinking it, but it is far, far less safe than we think it is, and is far, far less good than we think it is. By the way, if anybody here, I don't know if this, I don't know if everybody already signed up by email or what. If anybody here, I have a very active email list where I help alert people to some of the issues. If anybody would like to be on my email list, either hand me your card or as legibly as you can, give me your email information and your name. I'll be glad to add you to that. The question again was?
We've got this patchwork.
Oh yeah. So
Policy,
I'm working on this new
regulation.
water book right now, and I discovered something early in the process that completely was dumbfounding. Just any, if you, I want to sort of put you on the spot a little bit, not you, Josh, because I can't afford 2 books for you. Anybody else you want to be my role model? Okay, you. What's your name? What? Gabriel? Okay, Gabriel. Okay. But I have to call you twice to give you a free book. So I'm sort of hedging my bets with you. But go ahead. So Gabriel, how many separate water utilities do you think there are in the United States? 100. There are 50 states. So how many do you think there are? 100. There are 2 a state. Are there like 500? 10 a state? Are there 5,000? I mean, give me.
Maybe 1 or 2 for each state.
1 or 2 for each state, right? That would be kind of like, would make sense, right? And maybe for a big state like California or Texas, maybe 5, right? Something like that would be fair, right? I suckered the guy, I just want you to know. I just suckered him. There are 151,000 water systems in the United States. There are 53,000 significant water systems in the United States. There are over 100,000 that are for small, very small hookups in communities, so push them aside. There are over 50,000 water systems in the United States. Mm-hmm. How brain dead do we have to be to think that we could get high quality engineering, high quality personnel, good outcomes with that kind of fractionated governance system? Mm-hmm. Crazy. I didn't mean to make you, I was suckering you deliberately. So, okay, you get the book. Okay. So, see me afterwards. But think about this. I mean, so first and foremost is our governance system is insane, number 1. Number 2 is we have a really crazy system that encourages enormous amounts of wastefulness in the United States. When the US had lots of people in the East Coast and almost no people in the West, we wanted to move people to the West. That was the interest of the railroad industry. That was the interest of the miners, and to a lesser degree of agriculture. So what we did was we told people that if they moved west, we would give them in perpetuity rights to all the water they use, because there were very few people, and there was lots of water, right? I mean, even now, the whole state of Oregon is only, what, 4.5 million people, but right. 150 years ago, there's probably, probably wasn't even more than 100,000 or a few 100,000, if that. Mm-hmm. Maybe not even close to that, I don't know. But think about that. So we gave people in perpetuity rights to water, and now it's many years forward, and now there's lots of people out west, and there's not lots of water pro rata. In fact, there's less water because of all kinds of problems with infrastructure and pollution. And what do? What do we say to people? You have the same rights that your great-grandfather had to the water. And so what does that effect is? The effect is that if you're a cotton farmer in Arizona, which would be the stupidest possible thing I could think of. Why? Because cotton is the second most water-consumptive crop in the world after alfalfa. Why would you allow someone to grow cotton in sandy soil in Arizona? And you know why they do it? Because they have water rights. And because the law is structured in such a way that if you don't use it for 3 consecutive years, you lose whatever you don't use. So we use again, we had some economics majors here, but you don't have to be an econ major to understand something as basic as this. You don't want to encourage wastefulness. You want to create policies that have some sort of smarts here. You don't want to say to everybody, please leave your lights on in your hotel room. You want to figure out a way to get them to not do that.
So I guess I hear what you're suggesting in part, and it goes back to this market pricing, but also, I think what I heard you say is incentives matter. Then somehow getting the incentives right is going to have some implications for better water usage. Yeah, because we don't live in a dictatorship, so you're not going to put guns to people's heads. You have to either buy their rights back or you have to create a new incentive. The incentives in the old days worked perfectly, right? Mm-hmm. We wanted to move people west. We wanted to have people working in the mines. We wanted to have people in agriculture. We wanted to build out railroads. It worked. Now we have to change the incentives because society has changed. So is that one of the first things you suggest we think about? I think that we should think about, first of all, giving incentives to farmers to change their water policies. Mm-hmm. So, for example, again, far from where we are right now, but very significant for all of us. Anybody here of the Ogallala? Anybody here from the Midwest? Anybody here from the Midwest? You are. What state? Illinois. Illinois. Okay. Not perfect, but anybody else from the Midwest? Yeah? Iowa. Michigan. Okay. Not my Midwest. Okay. The High Plains states of the Midwest, the farm states, are the Ogallala Aquifer. So just to give you some context, you want to get yourself angry? I'll tell you something. I'll tell you a true story. The Ogallala Aquifer
took 40,000 years to fill. Rain and snow and slowly absorb water. Remember I said at the outset about rainfall and how it gets absorbed in the soil? Well, this took 40,000 years to get richly filled with water. This is Nebraska and South Dakota and Iowa and Kansas and so forth. Texas, Oklahoma. And sometime around 1950, farmers returned from World War II, and more importantly, the super pumpers that were used on battleships in case they got hit by a torpedo, the pumps are turned from a military use to a civilian use. And the key civilian use they're used for is to pump the groundwater out of the aquifer. So from 1950 to 2000, how long did I say it took the aquifer to fill? 40,000 years. From 1950 to the year 2000, they pumped out 1/3 of the Ogallala aquifer to grow corn and wheat and so forth to sell around the world. It was for far more than our use. They didn't use drip irrigation. Because why? Because the water was functionally free. Energy prices were cheap, the pumps cost what they cost, and you might as well amortize the cost of the pumps. From 2000 to 2012, of course, we got smart then, right? Because we knew we've pumped the hell out of this thing, so we got to get smart, right? Right, Josh? I'm sucking you a second time. You got to be mindful of me. Oh, no, you're Josh.
Yes.
You're
Gabe.
Gabe. I'm sorry. I apologize. Gabe. Josh. Yeah. Okay. From 2012, they pump another 1/3 of the aquifer out. Now there are whole pockets of the aquifer area that are totally dry. Farmers are packing up. This is a crazy policy. So first of all is get agriculture right. Second of all, get governance right. Third of all, in our cities, in our big cities in America, we lose approximately 1/3 of our water because of broken infrastructure. Our pipes are broken throughout all of our cities. In Israel, they lose under 10%. In America, we lose about 35%. We are a richer country than Israel is. We could do everything that Israel does in terms of fixing our infrastructure. We lose enormous amounts of water. There's a relatively simple solutions that we could be taking on. And then I would argue making use of, which California is starting to do, making use of sewage, developing desalinated water.
And I really have one more question, then I want to open it up for questions from the floor. And this really has to do with what I've been thinking about this, is what I call the innovation spillover effect. And what I mean by that is, as you sort of described what Israel had done in the area of water, I think translated into some of the other innovation and entrepreneurship activities in the country itself. And I wondered if you could speak to that at all.
Yes, and it's a perfect moment to dwell a little bit on why over our head it's a startup nation. It's a culture, it's a phenomenon. Israel is a society which has a completely different approach to entrepreneurship than we do. People are less fearful of doing a startup. People like the idea of trying something. In America, if you fail once, if you fail twice, if you fail 3 times, you're like, you don't go that far because you're kind of a loser. In Israel, it's a resume builder. The idea is you tried gloriously, and you try again, and you now have new relationships. And the guy who did Mobileye, Amnon Shashua, who just sold his business for $15 billion to Intel, this was his 5th startup. He failed miserably at the first 4. Okay, not bad. I think he got paid out in the end. And that kind of story, not at $15 billion, but that story is one that you hear over and over again in Israel. So the water innovation piece actually follows the rest of the story. I like to say that Zionism was a revolution not just of politics, which led to the creation of a state, but it was also a revolution of science. And the revolution was to challenge everything and to confront everything. And that process led to the idea of saying, why do we do it this way? Why don't we do it that way? Whereas in most of the world, utilities, engineering, the attitude is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of the mindset. In Israel, the mindset is one of constant ferment and, frankly, dissatisfaction. I interviewed Shimon Peres, the former president of Israel, for my book, and he said, it was kind of funny, he said that it's very difficult, he said, being a political figure in Israel because everybody thinks they could do it better. Everybody is constantly dissatisfied. And he says, this is misery for every politician and glorious for science and technology. And I think that that's the reason why, for example, Israel, I may have shared the statistic with one of you earlier tonight, but cybersecurity is a growing global problem. And Israel, in 2016, attracted 20%. Israel is less than 0.5% of the world's population. And in 2016, Israel attracted 20% of the global private equity and venture capital investment in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is, I believe, is because Israel is not just a startup nation, but it's a problem-solving ecosystem. The mindset is, tell me a problem, let me see if I can't solve the problem. I'll use technology, I'll use other means, sometimes through innovation, sometimes through thinking over the horizon, but we can figure out almost every problem has a solution. And that mindset is baked into the Israeli culture. It helps the people to demand also their leadership to do more in that way.
Terrific. Well, thank you. I want to open up to questions from the floor. So if you have a question, the one other thing is it has to be on the mic in order to be heard. And while we find the first question asker, I just want to announce two things. TAMID is currently recruiting new folks to join its organization, and they're open until March 2nd in terms of the application period. Also, when you leave here, in addition to the books, there are water bottles that are out there.
How appropriate.
Yep, water bottles out there, sustainably produced, but noisy if dropped on the floor in this room, so you'll pick them up afterwards, as well as T-shirts. So I just want to make sure I made that announcement, that you stay after and make sure you pick those things up. So first question.
Just please make sure you always tell me your first name, okay?
Okay. Hi, I'm Ruben.
Hi, Ruben.
Thanks a lot. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
If I can get away with it, I've got two questions.
What do you think? Should we let him have two?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, crowd.
You see, an Israeli crowd would have said no.
No, yeah, exactly. So the first question is, are there environmental costs to the water solutions that you've mentioned? I mean, I'm particularly curious about desalinization. Yeah. I mean, you know, you wind up with a bunch of, so anyhow, what are the long-term environmental costs of that we also need to be planning to somehow resolve? And the second is, how do we address the, I love the idea of putting water at its real price. I think it would be great if we did that with gasoline as well. But how do we address the social and economic costs of doing that, right? I mean, the immediate argument against putting water at its true price is that it'll hurt the poor and it'll slow down business. So what's a counter argument to cutting those subsidies?
Yes, so I'll try to remember both. You'll remind me if I forget one of them. By the way, on pricing, I want to correct something. You said something that is fundamentally erroneous. And that is, you said that gasoline does not reflect real pricing. Gasoline definitely does reflect real pricing. It does not, the companies themselves sometimes get oil depletion allowances to help them with their drilling costs. But the consumer pays the actual full boat cost. The consumer is not getting a subsidy. In fact, there's
Get for talking about big oil.
I think, no, that's right. They got upset. They cut off my energy. Right, exactly. So in fact, I would love to see a system like that in America. Now, where you're right about it is that what gasoline and other costs like that doesn't reflect is the cost to the environment. That's where I agree with you. And I would love to see, the energy costs reflect the full cost of the cleanup and the other things like that. And by the way, I would add to that, I'd like to see the same for chemical companies and pharmaceutical companies and all the others that degrade our environment. But in fact, that's the case. Now, I don't know if that answers your pricing question, but the price question is, you have to bring people to understand that it serves them better, because with the money, what they do in Israel is, it's not like it's stealing the money from the public. The government provides zero subsidy. The government is not basically involved in water pricing. It's between the water authority, the utility, and the consumer. And what the consumer gets for their full pricing, it's expensive water. But what they get they get fantastic water. They get 100% of the water they need whenever they want it. It's high quality. They understand that. They look around their neighborhood, and they understand that all their neighbors are running out of water, and they're not. So it's a different phenomenon. The first one, the environmental costs. There are environmental costs, but I think that they are not nearly as bad as you might think. So if you want, I'll just deal with desalination, just in the interest of time. And I'll talk about any of the other technologies. In fact, from an environmental point of view, drip irrigation is the gift that keeps giving. Because, again, there were only 1 or 2 farmers here. You were one of them. But one of the things you need other than sunshine and water to grow your crop is? Soil. Both soil, but also fertilizer. You need fertilizer. And usually what happens is you over-fertilize, because if you under-fertilize, you blow your crop. If you hit the right number, perfect. But if you over-fertilize, you pay no price for it, other than the cost of the fertilizer. At the end of the season, that extra fertilizer that doesn't get absorbed to the plant gets either dissolved into the groundwater, contaminates the groundwater, or it gets washed with the winter rains into a nearby river, which is why, anybody here from Iowa by any chance? Okay, you know what's going on in Des Moines? They have to denitrify all of the water that's coming into usage because the water has so much nitrate, fertilizer, in it that people are getting sick and pregnant women are at risk of losing their babies, their fetuses. So it's a very serious problem. Drip irrigation assures you of exactly the right amount of absorption of fertilizer. So you have none of that environmental problem. With desalination, the problem is that what you do is you need a fair amount of energy to desalinate the water. What you're doing is you're pressing water through nano filters. The holes are 1/500,000th of an inch large. They are tiny. And to press that seawater through it, sort of like if you ever made spaghetti and you're in a hurry, you know, so you pour the pasta that's been boiled into the colander, and then you press it down with a plate or something like that to get the extra water out. Well, that's how desalinated water works. You have to press that water through the filter, and that takes a fair amount of energy. So there's an energy cost. But the energy cost is lower, or about the same, as you use for a family of 4 for the refrigerator in your home. So a family of 4 getting desalinated water is the same energy cost as the refrigerator you have in your home. So we have refrigerators, we have air conditioners. For water security, if you're not running out of water, I would argue it's a good energy cost. Second of all, the salt, after it's desalted, the water is desalted, the salt goes back into the water. And there is an infinitesimally larger salinizing effect from doing that. But that's a complete red herring, no joke intended. It's a complete red herring because of the fact that if you're really worried about the salinization of our waterways, the first thing we should do is blow up all the dams. Because all the rivers that flow into the sea dilute the sea. And the Mediterranean is the saltiest major body of water in the world, but not because of the 5 or 6 desalination plants along the Mediterranean. It's because the Nile has been dammed by the Aswan Dam since the 1960s, I think, and trillions and gajillions and cotillions of gallons of water that would have flowed into the Mediterranean never got there because it got dammed. And that is the largest salinizing effect, is dams and not it's desalinated water. So.
Another question over here.
Oh. I say give it to her. Come on, give it to her. All right. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Alina, and so you mentioned that America has a very broken up water infrastructure.
Yes.
But I was wondering, like, it's very established, and how would it be possible to change it and rewire this structure in like high populated areas and cities? And does Israel have an example of doing that?
Yes, very much so. The Israel example is an excellent example. First of all, Israel uses mathematics to predict when a pipe is going to break. So they have a very wonderful modeling system, so you can dig out the pipe instead of an emergency when the pipe is broken and disrupting traffic in the middle of the day. You can do it on a weekend, or you can do it when there's low traffic in that area. So that's the first thing. It's a whole algorithm system that predicts when a pipe is going to break or when a little leak is going to turn into a big leak. So that's the first thing that they do. Second of all, they have a device they invented called the sleeving device that is sort of like, if you know how when you have what is the thing when you have a blockage in your heart arteries? A stent. It's like when you have a stent, you know, it snakes in through the pipe, and it finds where the hole is, where the leak is. It seals the hole, it seals the leak on the interior, and then it pulls out. Just the way a stent opens up the blockage, this closes off the hole. So they do that. And then the third thing is they spend more on infrastructure than we do in America. What we should be doing, the useful life of a pipe is usually about 50 years. So what we should do is we should say, okay, if it's 50 years, then as soon as it gets to like year 40 or 45 or 50 or 55 or 60, we're going to start replacing at the rate of X percent a year so that we don't get to year 65 or 70. But most of the pipes in our big cities are over 90 years old. In New York City, many of the pipes are 135 years old. And no surprise, we had 400,000 water main breaks last year in the United States. That's a lot of water lost. That's a lot of inconvenience to people's businesses and homes and traffic flows and all that. And that I wouldn't say none of them had to happen, but very few of them had to happen because we could have gotten them before the useful life of the pipe broke. Those three things, I think, are the key things. Predicting, fixing in sight, and replacing in an orderly way on a regular basis. By the way, while she's walking over, I want to tell you, did any of you here happen to know that the women's basketball team this weekend won a big championship? Did anybody here know that? So I want, oh, the microphone's already there? I don't care, I'm going to tell that story anyway. So yesterday, I get on my little commuter plane from Los Angeles to Eugene, Oregon. Oregon, did I pronounce it right? Oregon, I said it right, thank God. Okay, I'm working on it all day. Did I say it right, Natalie? Oregon? Whew, okay. You know how New Yorkers say Oregon? Oregon. Okay, but never again for me, baby. I'm right. And they call the Ducks? Is that what they were called? The Ducks? They are the Ducks. The Ducks, your great team, was on my flight. It was the most exciting thing. These were the great champions, and then I got off the plane, and it was like being in a movie. I'm walking, I mean, there were only like 30 people on the whole flight, but I walk into the terminal, and people are screaming and cheering. I'm thinking, this is like the great, like we've all seen that in TV and the movies. Like I was part of that experience, and it was thanks to you great Ducks. Thank you all. I hope you win the NCAA finals. I'm not a big sports fan, but
yeah.
Natalie got me an Oregon. Oregon. She got me a Big O sweatshirt today, and I'm going to be wearing it throughout the entire March Madness. Okay. What's your name?
How you doing, sir? My name is Ben.
Ben, hi, Ben.
I'm wondering, do you see any way for a consumer-based water filtration company to have an impact on water conservation?
For what?
Sorry for that. Maybe that was quick. Do you see any way for like a consumer-based, maybe like a mom-and-pop water filtration company, so just selling shower heads or water filters, to have any sort of impact on large-scale water conservation? Or, you know, I know you said it was mainly agriculture-based is where the problem stems from.
I think it's at the margins.
Okay.
You know, I think it's, as I say, I think it's smart to turn off your water while you're shaving. I think it's smart to maybe take a shorter shower. I think it's smart to have better appliances and so forth that are water sippers instead of water guzzlers. I think all those things are good, smart things. But I think that's really at the margins. We consume really hard to imagine the volume of water that we use. Most of us on average use very large quantities of water every day. So if you reduce it by a gallon or two, that's good. Multiply 330 million Americans, whatever the number is, that's good. But I think that there is very much more significant ways of reducing our water consumption.
Thank you.
Another question over here.
Maybe we'll just do one or two more. Is
I
that
think
okay?
we
Because
have one or two more
I still have to
questions.
get to Portland tonight because I have a 7 a.m. flight tomorrow morning, so which I'm really looking forward to. I hope the Ducks are on their way to some big competition. But
So we'll take two more questions.
we'll take two more questions. Is that
One
okay?
here
And then,
and
and then
one
I'll tell you what. And then I'm not going to leave till 9 o'clock. So while you all linger, and again, if any of you want to get a book, I'll be glad to personalize it, sign it for you, for a friend, for a parent, for whatever you want. And again, 100% of the proceeds go to charity. And the book itself is about half the price it is at the bookstore. Okay, yes.
Seth,
What's your name?
Kenny. My name is Kenny.
Hi, Kenny.
Thank you for what in many ways was an inspiring presentation. I do warn you about the downside of things. In Israel, for example, virtually all the surface water is polluted. The rivers are unsafe to even touch or swim in. There's a diversion of water from the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee in the north, that doesn't allow the Dead Sea to be replenished. How do you see Israel addressing those questions in terms of their water resources?
Yeah, actually, I have a whole chapter in the book on exactly that, Kenny. I think some of what you're saying is correct, some of what you're saying isn't correct. I think it's not true about the rivers anymore. They've all been cleaned up. You're speaking, I think, particularly of the Yarkon. The Yarkon now is actually, it's a beautiful and fantastic story of revival. I tell that story in the book. I interviewed the very people who made it happen, and it's an exciting story. When we get depressed that it's hopeless, things can't be made better. I have something that I've been saying a lot. Can I just say something? How many of you have high faith in government right now? How many of you have high faith in government? Okay, very few of us. And the truth of the matter is, government kind of, sort of delivers the goods and services sort of kind of the way they have for the last few years. Washington's a little bit more broken than usual. I make the argument that what we all can do is to encourage wins of governance wherever we can, right? We used to believe in the military, then we had a bunch of failed military expeditions. We used to think the FBI was invincible, and then they can't process a voicemail message saying a guy has a gun, he's going to kill people, and we start to lose confidence in our institutions. I make the argument that water is a fantastic vehicle for government to prove to the people that we, the government, are worthy of having taxpayer dollars and that we can deliver well on that. Now, I think in Israel, that's one of the things that they have sort of done. With water in general, they have built the military. People have great faith in the military in Israel. People have great faith in other institutions in Israel. And people have enormously high faith in government, in part because of the water equation. Now, what you say is exactly right. The Dead Sea is really problematical because it is fed by the Jordan River, and because the Jordan River doesn't have any flow anymore, that's a big problem. The Sea of Galilee, where Jesus famously walked, is shrinking, but that's shrinking not because it's being pumped out. It hasn't been pumped now in 3 years. No water has been taken out of it whatsoever in 3 years. Israel is in a catastrophically bad drought, and there is an environmental cost to that. There's a problem. But I keep saying this, and I tweet, if those of you are on Twitter, I tweet about water all the time. If you're interested, at Seth M. Siegel. I tweet about water. Think of how much worse Israel would be today if it hadn't taken all these remarkable steps over the past 25, 45 years. It would be the whole country would be desert. It would be like Syria. It would be like Jordan. I mean, it really, I don't want to talk about politics too much, but I'll say this. There's a lot of people talk about the Palestinians. Again, I said before, there's lots of problems with the Palestinian-Israeli relationship. The Palestinians would be in a catastrophically bad position right now if they didn't have Israeli water to provide for them. So I make the argument here that you're right about certain of these environmental things. Some of them are beyond their control, the weather. Some of them they've made very good on fixing. And some of them are just part of the nature of progress in our times today. I think it is a problem, though. I'm not dismissing it, and I do talk about it in a whole chapter in the book.
And I think we had one more question.
I think it's the
over here,
last one, and then I'll linger. One last thing. I think you've picked up tonight, and it's late, and you're tired, and if you're tired, I'm on New York time, so I'm even more tired. But it's late, and you're tired, and you maybe have other things to do. But I do want to say to you all that you may have picked up my passion for this by now. This really is my passion and my life's work. And I offer to each and every one of you, if you'd like my email address and be in touch with me, if you were shy tonight and had a question that wasn't answered, this is what I do. And I would be delighted if any of you now or next week have a sudden thought, or maybe you think that maybe you want to go into water as a career and want some help thinking about that. I want you to feel very free. Our relationship does not have to end this evening. It can, but it doesn't have to end this evening. Now, Josh and Gabe are not going to end this evening because they're going to be, every night holding on to this wonderful book before they go to sleep. But for all of the rest of you, this relationship does not have to end tonight. I really invite you to take advantage of using me as a resource if this in any way speaks to you. Okay. Yes.
Last question.
Hi, my name's Oscar. I'm a British exchange student here in Oregon.
From where?
From the UK.
UK.
Yeah. And
your English is surprisingly good.
Thank you very much. So I was as a European,
Wait a second. I got a question. You come from the UK, and you didn't think of going to like a sunny place for 4 years? You had to come here?
Yeah. Well, I'm used to it already, so
exactly.
I thought I might as well.
Where in England are you from?
I'm from Bristol, but I study up in Edinburgh, so doubly bad up there. But kind of as a European, it really disgusts me some of the profiteering I see in the health sector here in the US. And I was wondering how you envision kind of the marketization of water, and especially in the country like the US, which is so obsessed with profit and so averse to having government-run things.
I think it's a fair question, and it's one that I'm going to surprise you with my answer. And not because I'm a businessman. And that, some of you may not have been able to understand it because of that incredibly odd accent that he has. He was asking a question about privatization, and that the fact that in some places in America and around the world, water is now being privatized, so that instead of it being a public utility providing the water, it's a private company is providing the water. And the corollary of that, I don't think that was your question, frequently I get asked, how do you feel about bottled water companies buying up bottled water rights, okay? Which is not your question. And but to answer your question, I will tell you, I have absolutely no concern whatsoever one way or the other. I don't care if who is providing the water is a private company or a public company. I think there are examples where public companies do just fine and where public companies are wretched. I think there are times when private companies are great and where private companies are awful. What government's key job should be, essential job should be, is as the rule setter, setting out the standards by which our water needs to be administered, the quality level, what the chemical content should be, how often there should be service failures, how frequently it's permissible to have a leak in a pipe or a water main break, and one of hundreds, if not thousands, of criteria. And then, if a private company wants to bid for the rights and can deliver it at a profit for themselves and provide it as well as a public company can, I'm completely agnostic about that. You know, in New York City, where I live, it's kind of funny. Every night, after about 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, up and down all the commercial streets, private garbage trucks, haulers they call them, go up and down and pick up the trash of all the stores. Because for some crazy reason, I don't know what it is, in New York City, commercial trash has to be picked up by a commercial company, but my trash is get picked up by the city New York City Sanitation Department. I would say, put it all out to bid. Whatever makes it better, I'm fine with it. And it's the same thing with water. I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever. I want a strong, fiercely strong role for my government in setting out what standards should be. And after that, I could care less whether it's delivered by a for-profit company or a governmental agency. And in terms of bottled water, we'll end with a controversial note, which is, once again, I think that water needs to be used carefully, but that one of the smart uses of water is commerce. And that I think that every community, if, again, there's no corruption, if there's corruption, it's bad, communities can decide, is it intelligent for them to preserve their water for their own, leave it as groundwater, or leave it in the local lake, or leave it in the local spring, or sell the water. And they could sell that water to a bottled water company or to a tomato farmer down the road. And we create all kinds of mayhem about the bottled water companies, mostly, I would argue, because we don't like the plastic. But I think, once again, is that you could make the argument that we are in the business of using our water, husbanding it smartly, so that we know it's going to be there in 10 and 20 and 30 years. We want to go back to the words I began this evening with, we want to be innovative and we want to be sustainable. And if we are, then we should be smart about the water and figure out a way to make money out of it too. Okay, I had a terrific time tonight. I hope you did too. It was a long night, but I love time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be outside. I'm sure there's a table where I can sign books or something. Okay, bye.